Welcome to BAASS Connect 2020 and our SAGE HRMS workshop session. I'm Nancy Pierce and will be your host for this session along with Anna McNally, who's also on the call. We've developed this session with the existing HRMS users in mind, but if you're looking at HRMS for the first time, you're going to find lots of useful information here as well. So in this session, we'll be presenting HRMS news from SAGE, and we'll review the highlights of new features released over the past year or so. We'll provide some tips and tricks and review some of the more advanced features in HRMS, and we'll wind up with an overview of other products that are designed to integrate with SAGE HRMS. Just a reminder that all attendees are in listen-only mode, but please submit your questions during the presentation and we'll take a few minutes to respond to these at the end of the session. So as mentioned in Anna's first HRMS session, these are the products that SAGE has developed that are the base products in the HRMS portfolio of solutions. We'll come back later in the session, as I mentioned, to introduce some other solutions that were created by SAGE endorsed partners and other vendors. As a recap, SAGE HRMS is the core product used primarily by HR administrators. SAGE HRMS Train is an add-on license to open the Train module within HRMS, so it's all one product. This enables HR admins to keep records of each employee's training history, whether it be certifications, classes, courses, or training programs. Employee Self-Service, or ESS, is the web portal to allow employees and managers access to the SAGE HRMS data. And SAGE has deployed the SAGE 300 payroll within HRMS screens for a single sign-in access to both HR and payroll. If your payroll's already in SAGE 300 now, we'd recommend leaving it there and utilizing the SAGE HRMS link that brings the common employee data from HRMS to payroll. So let's move on to some SAGE news. Historically, quarterly updates were primarily used for deploying tax table updates and minor urgent fixes. Since HRMS can include US payroll, and in the US, some states or federal tax tables can change and updates on a quarterly basis, that's what the primary focus was. So in the past, all major changes to HRMS were managed in a product upgrade, and laterally up until 2017, these were labeled by the year of release. BAASS would and still will always include HRMS if you're doing a SAGE 300 upgrade, so we make sure that you're on the latest quarterly update. So to recap, SAGE HRMS is still the current version. It's going to remain of that label for until SAGE tends to change it to something more generic. SAGE is no longer issuing full version updates. So upgrades, it's just going to be updates. Quarterly updates will now include product fixes, enhancements, and new features. The latest quarterly update is 10.704931, and that was issued in September 2020, so Q3. And I've listed here on the screen of how you can use your help menu to find out what version you're on now. SAGE HRMS support has moved away from telephone support, so you can no longer call SAGE with an issue. SAGE has done this for several of their other product lines, and it's common practice with many software publishers. So you can use the SAGE support options from your home screen or of the help menu. So live chat will start off with a bot. SAGE's Peg will field your typed in questions, and if she can't help, she'll pass you on to a real person to chat with. If they need to escalate your issue to a technician, they may need to schedule a time to connect them with you. SAGE customer support will offer several options, including the chat, also SAGE knowledge base, documents, and more. SAGE is now only selling HRMS as the subscription license. All current HRMS customers have a perpetual license unless you bought it since October. So what does this mean? A subscription license is an annual fee to use the software. It's similar to your existing SAGE Business Care, but people who have bought a subscription don't pay that initial purchase cost. It's built into that subscription license. SAGE HRMS has not yet released information on transitioning existing perpetual customers to subscription. Anyone with SAGE 300 has seen this process when moving to SAGE 300C. SAGE will deploy many major enhancements and new features in the subscription version only. So we'll go through that list in a few minutes. I've included a view of the HRMS home screen in the subscription version here. You can see that they've moved to a cleaner, less colorful appearance. So this is a short list of the most impactful changes that have been released in SAGE HRMS 2017 over the past year or so. These are available to all HRMS customers, whether you're subscription or perpetual. The employee name fields have been extended, so there's no more having to shorten things up. There's longer field name for the last name, for it's 23 characters long. Job description field has been expanded from 25 to 60 characters, so you can get rid of some of those acronyms if you're using them. When you're terminating an employee, a prompt will ask you if you would also like to change the payroll status. And if you have that link into your Sage 300 payroll, you know that that's an important field. If you don't use that link to Sage 300, you can turn that prompt off. If you return to change the payroll status later after an employee's last pay has been processed, you will now be offered the option to create job history if you'd like. You can now use these fields on the Sage secure queries. So rehire, seasonal, smoker, time off, service date, and international phone number are now available if you want to include them in a query report. There's a new Canadian employees menu, and that will segregate the unique US and Canadian reports and setup items, which sometimes would be confusing for people just focusing on Canadian. Sage HRMS Payroll users will have easier access to create EFT functions, and the payroll data is now available in Secure Query. And Sage has added a new graduation cap icon in several HRMS screens with quick access to Sage University Anytime Learning videos. These videos cost $9.95 US unless you have the Sage Business Care Gold, which includes them. March of 2019 brought several nice enhancements to ESS. You now have the option to allow employees access to see and download their attachments in ESS. This is controlled by the HR administrator by selecting an option on each existing attachment to opt to display in self-service. Managers cannot see the attachments of their direct reports. It's just the employees only. Time off request email notifications now include the employee's name in the email to the manager, and that email also includes a calendar attachment that the manager can click to add the time off event to their own calendar. An employee gets the same link if the manager approves the time off request. And on a related topic, you can now tailor the outgoing email message. For example, you could include the link to your ESS website for easy one-click access to the ESS logon page. And employees will see that pending time off requests now move to a new manager if there's a change within the same employer. And best of all, the ESS time off calendar, which is used by managers, was improved to show time off for the direct reports by year or by month. So I'm showing the month version here. Each day in the calendar will show the employee's name highlighted with a color based on the status, such as pending or rejected or approved, and more items are shown when hovering over the name. So we can see here for Marilyn. And once the time has been taken and updated in HRMS, the employee's name has a strike through and no color in the background. Much easier to identify what's going on. Sage has added some options to encourage more employee engagement. Of course, all of these are initially controlled by the HR admins. So if your company wants to use these enhancements or not, it's up to you. You don't have to. The new organization chart view shown here allows employees to look up and down the org chart, seeing names and photo and title. There's that contact info link that's on each employee, and it's a quick link to the employee company phone list. The company phone list can now include the employee's alternate email address, their home and cell phone numbers, pager and fax numbers, and these are all from their personal profile and phone pages in HRMS. HR admin can opt to turn that setting on, and if they have it on, then each employee can then decide if they want to share their information or not, and they make those options in their ESS personal and phone pages. So, and also if admin allows employees to edit their personal profile in ESS, they can upload their own picture. And of course, you can have security behind all of that to approve it. So to date, there's been a few enhancements that have been released to just subscription licensed customers. If you use benefit letters, they can now be deployed to employees from ESS. As an aside, if you don't use benefit letters and you do have your insurance benefits set up in the HRMS system, you should look at this report. I'm showing a portion of it here on the screen, and this can come from HRMS now. You would just print it out to a PDF and email it, or print it out and hand it out. It's a great way to remind employees of the annual cost of benefits, especially if the employer pays a portion of the premiums. You can see that we have the employer annual contribution shown here, and it broken down into a percentage of increase in pay. I showed some of the cosmetic changes on the redesigned home screen earlier. As well, there's now, for subscription users, there's now going to be an icon, an eye icon to allow the user to view their password when they're logging into HRMS or ESS. The ESS logon setup now offers administrators the ability to enable two-factor authentication, which has their own list of security questions that the employee chooses from and can manage. And they will be enhancing the two-factor authentication functionality in the future as well. And in HRMS, the advanced find that I'm showing on the bottom of the panel here, this chart, this can now be exported out to a CSV file, and it opens up really nicely in Excel, which I'm actually showing in Excel. That's how nice it looks. And it allows for a quick way to manipulate the data for analysis just right from that basic finder. So where's Sage planning to take HRMS in the future? I'm a part of the HRMS Business Partner Advisory Council. We're a group of individuals representing business partners like BAASS, who meet with Sage HRMS leaders on a regular basis throughout the year. We often talk about the roadmap, but this is confidential information, so Sage has asked that I read this safe harbor disclaimer statement before proceeding to share their plans for the future. So, statements regarding our product development initiatives, including new products and future product upgrades, updates, or enhancements, represent our current intentions, but may be modified, delayed, or abandoned without prior notice, and there's no assurance that such offering, upgrades, updates, or functionality will become available unless and until they've been made generally available to our customers. So these are the slides that Sage has provided for their roadmap. And basically, I'm not going to go through the details, there's a lot here, but basically what they're saying here is that the focus is on enhancing ESS and moving some HRMS features into ESS so administrators can utilize the web logon. This is an overview of the enhancements for 2020 and 2021, but I've got a slide that details things in more specific details. In mid-2022, we should see some of those HRMS features moving to ESS and having that more modern look to the ESS admin pages. I'm on a committee with Sage HRMS developers to provide input on those changes, which is really exciting. This kind of development, though, takes a lot of effort and consideration. So I understand if that was actually going to be delayed. So into some details, Sage has shared this detailed list of enhancements for each quarter. These features will be available for both subscription and perpetual customers. And the highlight here of really just the things that I thought were more important was the ability to have a default on savings benefits for employee percentages. You can set that, it'll trickle down to the employees and change it there. An option to allow secondary supervisors to see employees in ESS, allow the HRMS user to define the export location of a report, and so everybody can have their own export location, and enhancements to the HRMS Payroll open enrollment process screen for those who use HRMS Payroll. This chart lists the enhancements that will be available to subscription customers only, in addition to that prior list. The December release, Q4, that's coming out soon, should bring some improvements to attachments, as well as easier access to secure queries from the home page. And then next year, they plan to add links to reports and time off on the HRMS homepage, more details in ESS for the time off summary data, allow administrators a list of employees who have signed into ESS, which can be very helpful, a team share calendar with more functionality, adding the organizer to the home page, allowing the ESS web and file links to be employer specific, and finally, we're all happy to see the plan to deploy T4s from ESS. Stretching into 2022, Sage plans the following for subscription only: enhancements to ESS View Builder reporting tool, enhancing integration capabilities, allowing more options for the gender field, and options to pay employees through PayPal and Stripe, and a language tool for ESS. So I hope this brief run through has helped you to get an idea of the intentions that Sage has for HRMS and ESS over the next few years. Okay, we've got a few tips and tricks that we'd like to share, remind you about. Due to time restraints, I won't dive deeply into each one of them, but I wanted to introduce or remind you about these features that I often see existing users not using when I do upgrade training and things like that. So let's start with the HRMS organizer. Where do you find it? It's in Connected Services under Sage HRMS Tools. Some users set the organizer to be the default screen upon login. As a tip, you can do that from your user preferences. And what can it do? What is the HRMS organizer? So as you progress through any of the tasks in HRMS that have checklists, you can opt to schedule part of a task. For example, during the new hire task, you might not have the emergency contact information for an employee, but you want to remember to come back and do that later. So you would when you're going through your process, you come to that step, it'll open up the organizer, and you can define, similar to this screen that I'm showing here, is you can define when and who will do that task, and you can assign it to another HRMS user, and option to have that shown as a task in Outlook. The calendar view in the background shows the tasks that are outstanding for today and in the past. And you can also see a list of information as well, information tasks. You can also add your own tasks and set those up. And then you can execute a task when the time comes, and it'll actually open up that screen on the employee, so you can go ahead and just proceed with that. Let's take a minute to talk about the HRMS finders. I know you use them all the time, but the Quick Find has been out for a few versions for a couple of years now, but I see lots of people not using it. If you don't have a lot of employees, if you don't have a lot of employers, and if you don't move employees around a lot, it works great, and it quickly presents a list of employees based on ID, first or last name, as you type in any of those characters. For the advanced find, this is the classic finder, but it's had some enhancements over the past few updates. The personalize will open up this grid that you can move, tick off fields that you don't want to see, or move your fields around, reorganize them, and also change the sort default. Then in the actual chart of the advanced find, if you click on any of the headers in the chart, it'll change the sort order to be based on any column. And the best little feature there is the records, number of records found. Dynamically changes based on your settings. And also the more options. I often find people forget about this. What I've got an example here is I've used the none specified on the division field. And you can see I've returned 7 employees that are missing that information. So very handy now. Right from here, I could click on the first employee, go to that page, fill that in, save it, hit next on that employee panel, and just scroll right through that same page for all those employees and fill that data in. Another way you can use this is just sort by any of these on a field. So you might pick up one department, for example, and scroll through all those employees to make the common changes. Secure Query is accessed from the reports menu. It's a powerful ad hoc reporting tool in HRMS. It's not new, but I either find that it's never used or it's used so much that sometimes people forget about the standard reports because they love creating their own reports so much. Note that I accessed this from the employees menu and not from my Canadian employees menu. I have data for both US and Canadian employers, so I see both of them. In this situation, Secure Query behaves the same in both, so it doesn't matter which way I open it. Query allows you to select specific fields to include in your report and produces the data in a columnar fashion, so it's really easy to open up in Excel. If you create a query report, you can make it private you can make it public to share it with other HRMS users or keep it private. If you make it public, you can select which HRMS users will have access to it and if they can view only or update the settings on the report. So if you've spent some time putting together a nice report, you don't want to change that, maybe delete a field, you just make it view only and they can just run it. ESS has a similar tool called View Builder. Since ESS is web-based, you can share those reports by providing the report's URL specific to specific people by email, so they can open it on the web or from Excel. And some reports, the system will ask for their ESS login before launching the report, and current data is returned each time the report is run. So if a manager needs to see a list of his employees' home contact information in the middle of the night, for example, to react to a storm emergency, he'll get the correct data and not have to wonder if the last printout is still current. Manager reports could be deployed as custom links on the manager menu in ESS, and employee reports could be available from the employee menu. Either way, they'll only see the data that's relevant to them. So let's talk about some advanced features. Sometimes you can only do so much during your HRMS implementation project. Once you get the data migration and the day-to-day processing down pat, you may want to think about how you can use some of the more advanced features of the system to do some fine-tuning. In HRMS, there's several options in the system setup to customize your system, as shown here, but I specifically want to mention the design custom panels. This is a very powerful feature in HRMS, which allows you to create pages of your own drop-down lists that you've created in the custom code tables, or existing fields, or custom fields for date, text, and number formats. If the existing pages and fields in HRMS are not managing all the HR data for you, creating your own is an option. And then for those using ESS, another nice feature that I want to remind you about is to turn on the ability for the HRMS users to use the self-service link to launch ESS as that employee. And I'm showing this from Marilyn's little screenshot down here. It makes it easier for the HR admin to help an employee with a question if they can actually log in and see the ESS as that employee sees it. And finally, there's an audit report that can be run based on specific fields that show who changed the data and when. So just some of those more advanced features are just run to remind you about. So there's lots of options for extending the functionality of Sage HRMS to include products that are created by other vendors. And just to be generic here, you can get a product that will send email notifications triggered from data in HRMS and or payroll. In fact, this product can work for almost any database. It just sends emails. It could be date-based, X number of days before a certain, date, or X number of days after the hire date, for example. You could also attach reports if you get that component. There's lots of things you can do there. Another idea is create and deploy fillable forms based on HRMS data for employees and or managers to fill in. Then upon approval, the data is updated in HRMS. So it reads the HRMS data and then writes back to it. It also allows for more complex approval workflows than what you see in ESS. And it can also be used nicely for performance reviews. And there's various time collection options. In later sessions today, you'll learn about Manusonic and our BAASS time, to name a few. There's a web-driven learning management system and a web-driven applicant tracking system, web deployed, and also web organization charts. So you can allow creating and sharing of professional org charts with your organization. So that's it for me. I just wanted to remind you to post your questions and then we can respond. And I'm not sure, Haley, if you've seen any questions coming in.
I do have some questions here already.
Great,
so
thanks.
The first one I have is, are there different prices for the products that extend HRMS?
Good question. Yes, those products I was just talking about, they do all have their own price points. Some of those are by Sage endorsed vendors, so we can order them from the Sage website. Others, we have relationships with those vendors, so we can put that pricing together and also help you to review them and see if they are applicable or would be helpful to your organization. That's great.
Okay. How can I get the list of future new features that were shown?
Yes. So the Sage screens that I showed did have a lot of details there, and I did kind of, you know, highlight a few of them. Don't forget, you do get a link to this recording, and you can go back and you can take a closer look at those screens and dig into those. And if you have any questions, just let us know.
And the last question I have here is, I'm interested in moving to subscription. How do I do that?
Yes, so Sage hasn't given us that path forward yet. I know they're going to want to have people move to subscription. I think they just haven't figured out that transition. So if you are interested in that, please do mention that in the survey, and we'll be sure to keep you in touch. Sometimes people don't get the emails from Sage if they haven't got that turned on, or they're not the person that's on the list. So, we'll be sure to contact you when we get those kind of details, because that's where all the exciting features are happening really going forward. The Sage isn't going to forget about the perpetual customers. There will be some features there, but eventually they will be looking to move everybody over to subscription. So that'll be an exciting ride to get onto.
It does look like that's all the questions that we have for this session. So I'd just like to thank you, Nancy, for presenting.
That's great. Thank you very much, Haley, and enjoy the rest of your day, everybody.